The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the cobblestone streets of Sevilla, Spain. The air was thick with the scent of orange blossoms and the distant hum of flamenco music. Inside the Gran Hacienda de los Reyes, the tension was palpable. Isabella Morales sat stiffly on a velvet sofa, her fingers clutching the fabric of her dress. Her heart pounded in her chest as she faced her parents, Don Alejandro and Doña Carmen Morales, their expressions unreadable. Across from her, her older sister, Valentina, dramatically wiped away tears with a silk handkerchief. I can't do it, Valentina cried, shaking her head. I just can't. Isabella's brows furrowed. Do what? She asked cautiously, though she already had a sinking feeling in her stomach. Her mother exhaled sharply. Your sister cannot marry Diego Castillo in his condition, she said, her voice clipped and impatient. Isabella's body went rigid. Diego Castillo, the wealthy businessman, the perfect fiancé Valentina had been set to marry. He had been involved in a tragic accident 2 months ago and now lay in a hospital bed, unresponsive. Wait! Isabella's voice came out hoarse. You mean the wedding is still happening? Her father scoffed. Of course it's happening. Do you have any idea how much is at stake? Isabella's heart pounded harder. But Valentina doesn't have to go through with it. Her mother's cold eyes met hers. Because you will. The words hit her like a slap. Isabella shot to her feet. What? No, that's insane. Valentina dramatically sobbed louder. Don't you understand, Isabella? I can't marry a man who might never wake up. I'm only 24. My whole life would be ruined. Isabella turned to her parents in disbelief. And you think I should? Her father's jaw tightened. It's not about what we think, Isabella. It's about survival. The Castillo family is powerful. This marriage is the only thing keeping them from pulling out of our business deal. If they do, we will lose everything. Her mother's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. You wouldn't want to ruin your family, would you? Isabella's throat tightened. This wasn't fair. Valentina sniffled, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Life isn't fair, sweetheart. But at least this way, you'd be useful for once. Isabella felt the sting of her sister's words. She had always been the forgotten daughter, the one who lived in Valentina's shadow, and now they wanted to throw her away like a pawn. She wanted to scream, to refuse, to run, but she knew better. Her father wasn't bluffing. She had seen the financial reports. The Morales family was drowning in debt, and if the Castillos backed out, it would be the end. She swallowed hard. If I do this, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, what happens to me after? Her mother's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. You will be Señora Castillo. You will live comfortably for the rest of your life. But what if he never wakes up? Her father waved a dismissive hand. Then you live as a widow. In a few years, no one will question it. Isabella clenched her fists. This was her life they were deciding, her future, and she had no choice. Fine, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'll do it. The Hacienda de los Reyes was transformed into a scene straight out of a fairy tale. White roses cascaded from every arch, chandeliers sparkled with golden light, and the air was filled with the soft strains of a Spanish guitar. But beneath the beauty, tension simmered. Isabella stood at the altar, dressed in an elegant yet cold white gown. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet, her stomach in knots. Instead of a groom standing beside her, there was a nurse, ready to sign the marriage documents as Diego's medical representative. The officiant's voice echoed through the grand hall. Do you, Isabella Morales, take Diego Castillo to be your lawfully wedded husband? Her breath hitched. She turned slightly, glancing at Valentina, who sat in the front row, completely unbothered, her attention already shifting to a handsome man beside her, a new lover, no doubt. This wasn't supposed to be her life, and yet she forced herself to speak. I do, the officiant nodded. With the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The words felt hollow. There was no kiss, no celebration, just the sound of a pen scratching against the marriage certificate, as Isabella signed her name, binding herself to a man who wasn't even awake. As she looked down at the paper, at the name Isabella Castillo, a single tear slipped down her cheek. This wasn't a wedding. It was a sentence. The Hacienda Castillo was breathtaking, A sprawling estate of whitewashed walls, terracotta roofs, and gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see. But, to Isabella, it felt cold and unwelcoming. As she stepped into the grand foyer on her first day as Señora Castillo, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. The staff lined up to greet her, their faces unreadable. Some murmured polite greetings, but others exchanged knowing glances. "Look at her," one whispered, "marrying a man in a coma just for his fortune." "She's nothing but an opportunist," another muttered. "She won't last here." Isabella ignored them. She wasn't here for money. She was here because she had no choice. And if she was going to survive in this world, she needed to prove that she was more than just a woman who had married a millionaire on his deathbed. Diego's bedroom was enormous. Too big, too empty, too silent. The only sound was the soft beep of the machines monitoring his condition. Isabella stood by his bedside, looking at the man who was now legally her husband. He was handsome, even in sleep. Dark hair, sharp jawline, broad shoulders. But there was something heartbreaking about seeing him like this, trapped in a world between life and death. She slowly reached out, hesitating before gently placing her hand over his. His skin was warm, but unresponsive. "I don't know if you can hear me," she whispered, "but I'm Isabella, your wife." The word felt foreign. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to continue. "I don't belong here, and I'm sure if you were awake, you wouldn't want me here either. But until you wake up, I'll take care of you." And she meant it. Despite the circumstances, she wouldn't abandon him. Every morning, Isabella sat by Diego's bedside, reading to him from the books on his shelves. She adjusted his pillows, made sure his nurses followed the correct routines, and even brought fresh flowers into his room to make it feel less lifeless. Slowly, the whispers in the mansion began to change. "She actually takes care of him," one maid said. "I thought she was just waiting for him to die," another replied. "Maybe she's not as heartless as we thought." One evening, while searching for a book in the mansion's vast library, Isabella stumbled upon a locked drawer in Diego's study. Curiosity gnawed at her. She looked around, making sure no one was watching, before carefully picking the lock with a hairpin. The drawer slid open with a soft click, revealing a folder filled with documents and photos. Her breath hitched as she pulled them out. It was a report on Diego's accident. But something was off. The official record said it had been a car crash, an unfortunate tragedy. But these documents suggested otherwise. The brakes on Diego's car had been tampered with. Someone had wanted him dead. The rain tapped gently against the windows of Diego's bedroom, filling the silence with a rhythmic, almost comforting sound. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast warm light over the room where Isabella sat, curled up in a chair beside Diego's bed, reading aloud. It had become a routine. Every evening she would sit there, reading to him as if her voice could somehow reach into the void where he was trapped. Tonight, she was reading The Alchemist, one of the books she had found on his shelf. And, when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it, she read, her voice soft but steady. She sighed, closing the book. "I wonder if you ever liked this story," she murmured, glancing at Diego's still face. His breathing was steady, unchanged. His dark lashes rested against his skin, his features frozen in an expression of deep sleep. Isabella reached for the glass of water on the nightstand, but as she did, something caught her eye. Her breath stalled, his finger moved. It was just a small twitch, barely noticeable. She blinked, her heart pounding. Had she imagined it? Holding her breath, she leaned in, watching intently. Nothing. Silence. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. Maybe she was so desperate for change that she was seeing things. Shaking her head, she exhaled and stood up. "Good night, Diego," she whispered, brushing her fingers lightly over his hand before leaving the room. But what she didn't see was his finger twitch again. Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that what she had seen was real. And by nightfall, she got her answer. As she sat beside him again, reading in the dim glow of the lamp, she noticed it, his hand moving ever so slightly. Then, the next morning, as she adjusted his blanket, his eyelids fluttered for a fraction of a second. It was happening. Something was changing. She immediately called the doctor. Dr. Javier Morales, Diego's personal physician, arrived within the hour. His expression was unreadable as he checked Diego's vitals, tested his reflexes, and examined his condition. Isabella stood by anxiously, her hands clasped tightly together. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Morales straightened and turned to her. "You were right," he said. "His neurological activity is increasing. His body is responding." Isabella's heart leaped. "So, does that mean he'll wake up?" The doctor nodded. "It's impossible to say exactly when, but yes, he's improving. He could regain consciousness at any time now." Isabella felt relief flood through her, but her relief was short-lived because news of Diego's possible recovery didn't stay quiet for long. And when Valentina heard about it, she came running back. It started with a phone call. Isabella was in Diego's room, adjusting the fresh flowers by his bed. When her phone buzzed, she frowned at the name flashing on the screen. Valentina. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello?" "Isabella," Valentina's voice was unnaturally cheerful. "I just heard the most wonderful news. Diego might wake up soon." Isabella's fingers tightened around the phone. "How did you—" "Oh, don't be silly, darling. News like this spreads. And as his fiancé, I had to call." Isabella's stomach twisted. Fiancé? As if Valentina had any right to still claim that title. "He's my husband now, Valentina," she said, her voice firm. Valentina laughed lightly. "Oh, sweetie, let's not get caught up in technicalities. We both know the only reason you married him was because you had no choice. But now that he's waking up," Isabella's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying don't get too comfortable," Valentina purred. "Because once Diego wakes up and sees who should really be by his side, this little fairy tale of yours will be over." The line went dead. Isabella slowly lowered the phone, her heart racing. She had fought to protect Diego when he was unconscious, but now she would have to fight even harder because Valentina was coming back, and she would do anything to reclaim what she thought was hers. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil in Isabella's heart. Rain hammered against the windows of the Hacienda Castillo, and thunder rumbled in the distance. She sat by Diego's bedside, her fingers intertwined with his, her mind racing with thoughts of Valentina's threat. "You're stronger than this, Diego," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know you are. Please wake up. I need you." As if in response, his hand twitched against stronger this time. Isabella's breath caught. She leaned in closer, her heart pounding. "Diego," she called softly. His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of awareness in his deep brown eyes. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. Isabella's hope wavered, but she refused to give up. She had come too far to let Valentina, or anyone else, destroy what she was fighting for. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the gardens glistening with dew. Isabella was in the kitchen preparing a cup of tea when the sound of heels clicking against the marble floor made her freeze. "Well, well," a familiar voice purred. "Look who's playing house." Isabella turned to see Valentina standing in the doorway, her designer dress impeccable, her smile sharp as a knife. "What are you doing here?" Isabella asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Valentina stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "I told you, darling. I'm here to reclaim what's mine." "Diego isn't yours," Isabella shot back. "Not anymore." Valentina's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. "We'll see about that." Before Isabella could respond, Valentina brushed past her and headed straight for Diego's room. Isabella followed, her heart racing. Valentina stood by Diego's bedside, her expression softening as she looked down at him. "Oh, Diego," she murmured, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I've missed you so much." Isabella clenched her fists. "Get away from him." Valentina turned to her, her eyes cold. "Or what? You'll throw me out? This is my family's estate, remember? You're just a guest here." Isabella stepped forward, her voice firm. "I'm his wife, and I won't let you hurt him again." Valentina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Hurt him? Darling, I'm here to save him. From you." Before Isabella could respond, a low groaning sound filled the room. Both women turned to see Diego stirring, his eyes fluttering open. "Diego!" Isabella rushed to his side, her heart pounding. Valentina's face paled. Diego, it's me, Valentina. Do you remember me? Diego's gaze shifted between the two women, his expression clouded with confusion. Finally, his eyes settled on Isabella. Who are you? He rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. Isabella's heart sank. He didn't remember her. Valentina smirked. See, he doesn't even know you. But Isabella refused to back down. She took Diego's hand, her voice gentle but firm. I'm Isabella, your wife, and I'm not going anywhere. The room was thick with tension as Diego's gaze shifted between Isabella and Valentina, his brow furrowed in confusion. His voice, weak but clear, broke the silence. I don't remember, he murmured, his hand slipping from Isabella's grasp. Valentina seized the opportunity, stepping closer to the bed. Diego, it's me, Valentina, your fiancé. Don't you remember our plans? Our future? Isabella's heart ached as she watched Diego's expression flicker with uncertainty. She wanted to scream, to tell him the truth, but she knew pushing him too hard could backfire. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke softly. Diego, it's okay if you don't remember right now. I'm here for you, no matter what. Valentina shot her a venomous glare, but quickly masked it with a sweet smile. Diego, you've been through so much. Let me take care of you, like I always have. Diego's eyes darted between the two women, his confusion deepening. I need time, he said finally, his voice strained. Isabella nodded, her heart breaking, but her resolve unwavering. Of course, take all the time you need. Valentina, however, wasn't as patient. She leaned in, her voice dripping with false concern. Diego, you don't have to suffer through this alone. I'm here for you. I always have been. Isabella clenched her fists but said nothing. She knew this wasn't the time to argue. Diego needed peace, not more chaos. Later that day, Dr. Javier Morales returned to assess Diego's condition. Isabella waited anxiously outside the room, pacing the hallway. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was thoughtful. He's physically stable, Dr. Morales said, but his memory is fragmented. Retrograde amnesia is common in cases like his. He may regain his memories over time, but there's no guarantee. Isabella swallowed hard. What can I do to help him? The doctor gave her a sympathetic smile. Be patient. Familiar surroundings, routines, and people can trigger memories, but don't push him too hard. Let him come to you. Isabella nodded, her determination renewed. She would do whatever it took to help Diego, even if it meant fighting Valentina every step of the way. Meanwhile, Valentina was already plotting her next move. She cornered Isabella in the library later that evening, her eyes cold and calculating. You think you've won, don't you? Valentina sneered. But let me remind you, Isabella, I know how to play this game better than you ever will. Isabella met her gaze, her voice steady. This isn't a game, Valentina. Diego's life is at stake. Valentina laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Oh, please. You're just as selfish as I am. You married him for your family, not for love. Isabella's hands trembled, but she refused to back down. I may have married him for my family, but I stayed for him. Can you say the same? Valentina's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. We'll see who he chooses in the end. That night, Isabella sat by Diego's bedside, reading to him as she always did. She chose The Alchemist again, hoping the familiar words might spark something in his memory. As she read, she noticed Diego watching her intently, his brow furrowed as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Do you remember this story? She asked softly, setting the book aside. Diego hesitated, then shook his head. No, but your voice. It feels familiar. Isabella's heart leaped. That's a start, she said, smiling through her tears. Diego reached out, his hand brushing hers. Thank you, he whispered, for staying. In that moment, Isabella felt a glimmer of hope. Diego might not remember her yet, but his heart was starting to. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and hope. Diego's condition improved steadily, but his memories remained elusive. Isabella stayed by his side, patient and unwavering, while Valentina continued her manipulative games. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Isabella found Diego sitting in the garden, staring at the fountain. She approached quietly, not wanting to startle him. "Do you remember this place?" she asked softly, sitting beside him. Diego turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "It feels familiar," he admitted, "but I can't quite place it." Isabella smiled, her heart aching with both hope and frustration. "This was your favorite spot. You used to say the sound of the water helped you think." Diego's brow furrowed as if trying to grasp the memory. "I wish I could remember," he murmured. Isabella reached out, placing her hand over his. "It's okay," she said gently. "Memories or not, I'm here for you." Diego looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "Why?" he asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "Why do you care so much?" Isabella's breath caught. She hadn't expected the question, but she knew her answer had to come from the heart. "Because I made a promise," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not just to you, but to myself. I promised to stand by you, to care for you, no matter what. And because, somewhere along the way, I realized I couldn't imagine my life without you." Diego's eyes softened, and for a moment it felt like the world stood still. But the peace was short-lived. Valentina appeared in the garden, her heels clicking against the stone path, her smile sharp and calculating. "Diego!" she called, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "There you are! I've been looking everywhere for you." Isabella's heart sank as Diego turned to Valentina, his expression unreadable. "Valentina," he said slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. Valentina stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at Isabella. "I see you've been busy," she said, her tone icy. Isabella stood, her voice firm. "Diego needs peace, Valentina, not your games." Valentina's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Games? Oh, Isabella, you're the one playing pretend. Diego doesn't even remember you." Diego's gaze shifted between the two women, his confusion evident. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice strained. Valentina seized the opportunity. "Diego, darling, you don't have to listen to her. She's just a stranger who took advantage of your condition. I'm the one who's always been here for you." Isabella's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Diego, I know this is confusing, but you have to trust your instincts. Who do you feel is telling the truth?" Diego looked at Isabella, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know." Valentina stepped closer, her voice softening. "Diego, remember our plans? Our future? You wanted to build a life with me. Don't let her take that away from us." Isabella's heart ached, but she refused to back down. "Diego, I don't have all the answers, but I know one thing for sure. I've been here for you every step of the way, and I'll keep fighting for you, no matter what." The tension in the garden was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Diego stood, his gaze shifting between Isabella and Valentina, his mind racing. And then, something clicked. A memory flashed before his eyes. A car spinning out of control, the sound of screeching tires, and a woman standing in the distance, watching with a satisfied smile. Valentina. Diego's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. He turned to Valentina, his voice trembling with anger. You were there, at the accident." Valentina's face paled. "Diego, what are you talking about?" Isabella's breath caught. "Diego, do you remember something?" Diego nodded, his gaze never leaving Valentina. "I remember her. She was there. She wanted me gone." Valentina's mask of sweetness crumbled, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "You're confused, Diego. You don't know what you're saying." But Diego wasn't backing down. "No, I'm not confused. I remember now. You tried to kill me." The garden fell silent as Diego's accusation hung in the air. Valentina's face twisted in panic, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Diego, you're confused," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you're saying." But Diego's gaze was steady, his voice firm. "I know exactly what I'm saying. You were there. You wanted me gone." Isabella stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Diego, what do you remember?" He turned to her. his eyes filled with a mix of anger and clarity. I remember the accident. The brakes failed, and I lost control, but before everything went black, I saw her, standing there, watching. She didn't try to help. She just smiled. Valentina's face paled, but she quickly recovered, her tone turning venomous. "You have no proof," she hissed. "It's your word against mine." Isabella's mind raced. She remembered the documents she had found in Diego's study, the evidence of tampered brakes. She turned to Diego. "There's proof. I found it in your study. The brakes on your car were sabotaged." Valentina's eyes widened in panic. "You're lying." Diego's jaw tightened. "Isabella, get the documents." Isabella nodded and hurried inside, her heart racing. She returned moments later, clutching the folder of evidence. She handed it to Diego, who flipped through it, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is enough to send you to prison," he said, his voice cold as he turned to Valentina. Valentina's bravado faltered. She took a step back, her voice pleading. "Diego, please, you don't understand. I was desperate. I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted you out of the way." "Out of the way?" Diego's voice was sharp, his anger barely contained. "You tried to kill me!" Valentina's shoulders slumped, her defiance crumbling. I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted you to disappear for a while." Isabella stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You were willing to destroy his life, and mine, just for your own gain. You don't deserve his forgiveness." Valentina's eyes filled with tears, but there was no sympathy in the room. Diego turned to Isabella, his expression softening. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for standing by me, for fighting for me." Isabella's eyes welled with tears. "I made a promise, Diego, and I meant it." Valentina was escorted off the estate by security, her threats and pleas falling on deaf ears. The police were called, and the evidence was handed over. For the first time in months, the Hacienda Castillo felt peaceful. That evening, Diego and Isabella sat together in the garden, the sound of the fountain filling the silence. Diego reached for her hand, his grip firm and steady. "I don't remember everything," he admitted, his voice quiet. "But I remember enough to know that you're the one who saved me. Not just from the accident, but from myself." Isabella looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "You don't have to thank me, Diego. I did it because I care about you, because I love you." Diego's eyes softened, and for the first time since he had woken up, he smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "I may not remember our past," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "But I know one thing for certain. I want to build a future with you." Isabella's breath caught. "Diego." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Isabella's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a simple yet stunning ring. "Isabella Morales," he said, his voice steady and filled with love, "will you marry me? Not because of a contract or a deal, but because I can't imagine my life without you." Tears streamed down Isabella's cheeks as she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Diego. Always." Months later, the Hacienda Castillo was filled with laughter and light once again. Isabella and Diego stood hand in hand on the balcony, overlooking the gardens that had become their sanctuary. "Do you ever think about what might have happened?" Isabella asked, her voice soft. Diego turned to her, his eyes filled with warmth. "Every day," he admitted. "But I don't dwell on it, because every day with you feels like a second chance." Isabella smiled, leaning into him. "We've been through so much, but we made it. Together." Diego wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "And we'll keep making it, no matter what comes our way." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's love, Isabella knew that their journey had been worth it. The pain, the struggles, the battles, they had all led to this moment, because in the end, love had triumphed. The pain, the struggles, the battles, they had all led to this moment, because in the end, love had triumphed.